I want you to close your eyes for like just a second.
Oh, setting a scene right out of the gate.
Right, yeah. I want you to just imagine this really intense soundscape. You're standing in the dark, in the dead center of a dense medieval forest.
Seems terrifying already.
It is. The wind is just howling through these ancient, rotting trees, and you can hear this low, indistinguishable whispering coming from the shadows.
Like it's vibrating right in your chest, you know?
Exactly. And then right beneath the wind, you hear it. The heavy, rhythmic thud of cloven hooves.
Getting closer.
Yeah, crunching on the dry leaves, getting closer and closer. It feels ancient and biological. It just feels deeply, primally terrifying.
Well, because it's the visceral soundtrack of human fear. I mean, it's the literal architecture of a nightmare that has spanned, what, continents and centuries.
And for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, that is exactly what humanity has been listening for. We've been searching the darkness for a literal monster.
Right, looking for the biological evidence.
Yeah, of a horned beast. Some entity with a pitchfork who magically whispers terrible things into our ears, just, waiting to snatch us into the shadows.
The classic boogeyman.
The classic boogeyman. But right now, I want you to take that entire medieval soundscape playing in your head, and I want you to abruptly cut the tape.
Just a sharp mechanical click.
Exactly. The folklore vanishes, and it's instantly replaced by the clean, rhythmic, high-tech hum of a modern avionics suite in a commercial airplane.
Wow. That is quite the juxtaposition.
It is incredibly jarring, right? You go from the terror of the dark woods to the glowing dials, the steady beep of the radar, the perfectly engineered sanctuary of a cockpit.
It's completely sterile.
Right. But that contrast, as jarring as it is the entire foundation of what we are unpacking today in this deep dive.
And it's a necessary reframing, really, because what we are looking at today fundamentally rewrites that entire medieval narrative.
So let's lay out the mission here. What are we actually looking at?
Well, we're diving into some fascinating textual interpretation by J.R. Ahmed. He focuses specifically on the concept of Shaytan in Quranic literature.
Okay, the devil.
Right, traditionally. And this is the crucial pivot here. We are not looking at it through the lens of mythology or folklore or medieval paintings.
No hooves, no pitchforks.
No pitchforks. We are examining it as a phonosemantic blueprint of systemic deviation.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Because phonosemantic blueprint of systemic deviation is, it's a really dense, heavy academic phrase.
It's a mouthful.
If I'm listening to this right now, I'm thinking, okay, you're taking the ultimate historical villain, the monster in the dark, and you're turning it into a textbook syllabus.
I get that. I totally understand the resistance.
I mean, centuries of art and poetry are based on this being a literal physical entity.
Sure, it strips away all that cinematic drama we're used to. But the mission of this deep dive is to look past those fairy tales.
To see what's actually under the hood.
Exactly. We have to strip away the personifications of evil and examine what this ancient text is actually doing beneath the surface of the translation.
So treating it like a technical manual.
Pretty much. We are looking at it not as a book of myths, but as a sovereign intelligence blueprint. It's detailing the exact precise mechanics of systemic malfunction.
Which brings up a massive, glaring question. If the ultimate villain of human history isn't a physical monster,
right?
If there's no beast with hooves hunting us in the woods, then what exactly is hunting us?
That's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if it's just a malfunction, why have we spent millennia absolutely terrified of it?
Well, we've been terrified of it because we completely misunderstood the nature of the threat.
How so?
What the text actually does, and this is where Ahmed's analysis is so groundbreaking, is it entirely rejects the physical personification we've grown so accustomed to.
The red guy with horns.
Exactly. Traditionally, on the literal surface, Shaytan translates to Satan or the devil. We all know the image. The underground fire pit, the supernatural entity pulling our strings.
Right.
But when you apply this methodology to the source material, you realize the text is presenting Shaytan not as a biological species, but as a functional systemic malfunction.
Like a broken gear in a clock.
Yeah, it is a component, a vector of disruption, if you will.
I'm struggling with the linguistics of that, though.
Okay, what part?
Well, if there is no monster, if there's no entity from a fiery underworld, then why use a word that functions like a proper noun?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, why does the text make it feel like a who rather than a what?
That's a really natural hurdle.
Yeah.
But you have to remember how ancient languages operate, particularly Semitic languages like Arabic.
Okay.
The concept isn't a proper noun in the way we think of, like John or Sarah. It is a personification of the law of deviation itself.
Oh, so the role is personified, not a specific being.
Exactly. It is a functional role. To really grasp this, we cannot just rely on English translations. We have to do what the source text demands.
Which is what?
An atomic deconstruction of the word itself.
Atomic deconstruction. Okay, so you mean breaking the word down to its absolute lowest phonetic level, like letter by letter.
Exactly. In Arabic, words are built from root letters, but it goes deeper than just spelling. This is where we get into phonosemantics.
Right, you mentioned that earlier, phonosemantics.
Yeah. It's the idea that each letter, each specific sound a human mouth can make, carries a fundamental physical reality.
I need an example of this before we dive into the main word. Are you saying the sound itself holds a definition?
In a way, yes.
Like onomatopoeia, like buzz or crash.
It's much more complex than onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is imitating a sound, right? But phonosemantics implies that the phonetic articulation itself encodes a concept.
Wait, the physical movement of the mouth.
Yes. For instance, in Arabic, sounds that require the throat to constrict tightly often relate to concepts of gripping or holding.
Oh, wow.
And sounds that push air out rapidly relate to dispersal or scattering. The language is intrinsically tied to the physics of human interaction with the environment.
Okay, so the language isn't just arbitrary. It's not just a random collection of sounds we all agreed meant tree or water.
Precisely. The sounds physically mirror the concepts they represent.
That is wild. Okay, so let's look at the root for Shaytan.
So we're looking at 4 specific letters: shin, ya, iya, and nun. Shin, ya, nun.
Okay.
And if we audit these letters, think of it like a programmer auditing a suspicious piece of code in a computer system. A completely different, highly technical picture emerges.
All right, let's run the audit. Let's look at the code. The first piece, the first letter, is shin.
Right. Shin represents diffused complexity.
Diffused complexity, like what?
Imagine a focused digital signal suddenly breaking apart, scattering into static, just a burst of white noise.
Actually, the sound of the letter itself, shh, it sounds like static.
Exactly.
It sounds like a signal losing its integrity.
Yes. It represents the spreading of a signal, the scattering of elements, the chaotic branching of a system into a state of fragmentation.
Like things just falling apart.
From a physics perspective, you could think of it as entropy, a closed system moving from order to disorder.
So shin is the glitch. It's the entropy, the brokenness.
But a glitch alone is passive, right? It's just brokenness sitting there. That brings us to the second letter, ya.
Yeah. What does that do?
Ya represents active agency.
Active agency, like an interface.
Think of it as the functional interface, yeah. The execution mechanism. In an engine, it would be the sharp mechanical click of a relay engaging.
Okay, I get that.
It is the direct capacity to apply power and actually perform a task.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. So shin is the fragmentation, the entropy.
Right.
But when you add ya to it, that fragmentation isn't just sitting there passively degrading. It's weaponized.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to phrase it. Weaponized entropy.
It's active. It is actively executing the chaos.
Yes. It is active, executable entropy. Now, what is it attacking?
Right, there has to be a target.
That is the third letter.
Yeah. And what does E represent?
E represents the sustainable path. It is equilibrium. It is the extension of a true, firm direction.
So, stability.
Exactly. If you think about the biology of the human body, it would be homeostasis, the state of steady internal physical and chemical conditions maintained by living systems.
So it's the normal operating parameters.
Yeah.
The baseline, like the flight path of an airplane.
Yes, the baseline of a healthy, functioning system. And finally, we have the 4th letter in the sequence, nun. Nun represents the persistent record.
The persistent record, like data storage.
Exactly like data storage. Imagine the low, steady hum of a hard drive spinning up and locking in data.
Writing it to the disk.
Right. Nun is the vessel of storage. It is deep retention. It is the long-term persistence of information across time.
Okay, I really want to synthesize this because looking at it as a line of code is completely changing how I view the whole concept.
It really reframes everything.
Yeah. So if I am reading this phonosemantic blueprint correctly, shin is the glitch, the entropy.
Yeah.
Yaz is the executable file that actively runs that entropy.
Exactly.
It specifically targets and attacks, uses our operating system's normal, healthy equilibrium.
You've got it.
And nun is what happens when that glitch gets permanently written into our hard drive save file.
Yeah.
It locks it in. It becomes the new corrupted baseline.
The linguistic translation of that entire operational sequence, when you combine Shin, Ya, and Nun, is profound.
What does it mean altogether?
It literally describes the act of drifting, running, or scorching so far from a central source of nourishment that an entity becomes completely alienated.
Wow.
It becomes dried up, hostile, and completely opposed to equilibrium.
I mean, that is wildly different from a guy with horns holding a pitchfork and a link of fire.
It is infinitely more sophisticated. The text isn't giving us a cartoon villain. It's giving us a highly descriptive diagnostic of systemic failure.
A diagnostic manual.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the broader architecture of the text, it talks about this concept of Sunan Allah.
Let's define that, because that's another heavy term. Sunan Allah. What does that mean?
In this context, Sunan Allah refers to the natural laws, the systemic frameworks established by the Creator.
Like the laws of the universe.
Right. Physics, biology, sociology, human psychology, these all operate on established sovereign laws.
Okay.
Within those laws, a Shaytan is simply the component of systemic deviation. It's the principle of fragmentation operating within a designed system.
Okay, I follow the logic. But if this is a software glitch, a line of corrupted code, where's the hardware? Because a computer virus needs a motherboard to run on. If the systemic vector is real, how does this steer us off course in our actual daily lives?
That is the pivotal transition right there. To understand how this executes in human reality, the source provides a framework that perfectly mirrors the avionics suite you imagined earlier.
The cockpit hum.
Exactly. It's the concept of the 1-degree navigational drift.
I love this analogy, but let's really build the cockpit for the listener. Because a modern commercial airplane isn't flown with, like, cables and pulleys anymore.
Right. It's an incredibly complex digital system.
It's all computers. Fly-by-wire.
Imagine that fly-by-wire system. The navigation computer is programmed with a perfect, mathematically sound flight path.
It knows exactly where it's going.
It calculates wind resistance, altitude, fuel consumption, the curvature of the Earth, all to get you safely from point A to point B.
And in this psychological framework we're building, that perfect flight path represents what?
It represents truth, honesty, fairness, self-control.
The good stuff.
The fundamental principles that keep a human life or a human society functioning in a state of sustainable equilibrium.
Okay, so the plane is flying on air. It's healthy. It's doing what it's supposed to do.
Now imagine the active entropy, that Shinya sequence, enters the system.
The virus gets in.
A rogue software virus, or maybe a faulty magnetic signal, infiltrates the cockpit's computer. Now, the crucial thing to understand about this vector is its stealth.
It doesn't blow up the plane.
No, it does not violently rip the yoke out of the pilot's hands. It doesn't shut down the engines. It does not cause the cabin to depressurize or alarms to blare.
I suppose if it did any of those things, it would be a pretty terrible virus.
Why do you say that?
Well, if the engine shut down, the pilots would notice immediately. They would react, run their emergency checklist, and fix it. Or at least they'd fight it.
Exactly. A loud, violent attack creates immediate resistance. So the vector does something far more insidious.
What does it do?
It tricks the instruments into drifting just 1 degree off course.
1 single degree.
Just one. The text explicitly warns against following the footsteps of this vector. The Arabic word used there is kutuwat.
Kutuwat. Footsteps. That implies a pace, doesn't it?
It implies a slow, methodical, step-by-step process. It is pure incrementalism.
So it's not a sudden cliff.
No, it is not a sudden leap off a cliff. It is a gradual, almost imperceptible wandering away from the path.
I have to say, that is infinitely scarier to me than a mythological monster.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. If I see a monster in the woods, my biology knows exactly what to do. Fight or flight kicks in. Adrenaline pumps.
You defend yourself.
Yeah. But a 1 degree drift, that feels perfectly normal while it is happening.
That's the danger.
The plane is still flying smoothly. The engines sound completely fine. The altitude is steady. You are just sitting in the pilot seat drinking your coffee, but your destination has fundamentally changed. And you have absolutely no idea.
This is where the concept of the pilot comes in. In this analogy, the pilot represents our analytical mind, our intellect.
Okay.
The text calls this the ache.
Equal. We're going to need to unpack that term later, but for now, it's our logic, our reasoning.
Correct. It is the part of you that is designed to monitor the instruments.
The pilot.
Right. And if the ACL do not notice this tiny 1-degree mistake, the math is completely unforgiving.
Because it compounds over time.
Exactly. If you fly 1 degree off course from New York to Los Angeles, you don't end up in Los Angeles. You end up miles out over the Pacific Ocean or deep in Mexico.
And you eventually run out of fuel.
You run out of fuel and you crash in the wilderness.
And the crash at the end isn't the glitch. The crash is just the mathematical inevitability of the 1-degree drift that happened like hours ago.
Precisely. The catastrophic failure at the end is just the noon. It's the persistent record locking into place.
Okay, the aviation analogy is crystal clear. It makes total sense.
What?
But I really want to push on the psychology of this.
Sure, let's get into it.
How does that drift actually happen in the human mind? Because, an airplane computer receives a bad magnetic signal from a storm or a hacked satellite. What is the bad signal in the human psyche?
Right, how does it translate?
Yeah, how does the code actually execute in our heads?
For that, we look at the internal cross-referencing within the text itself. The source text isn't vague about this mechanism at all. It provides a highly detailed psychological matrix.
Where does it say that?
It points to Surah An-Nisa, verses 119 through 120, and it details the exact operational method of this force.
And what does that operational method look like?
It relies entirely on 3 things: false projections, instant gratification loops, and the fear of scarcity.
False projections.
The text states, he promises them and arouses desire in them, nothing but delusion.
Nothing but delusion. So it has no actual substance. It's all smoke and mirror.
None whatsoever. And this proves that the vector operates solely within the psychological matrix.
It can't touch you.
It has absolutely no physical power to move your arms or your legs. It cannot force a human being to commit a crime. It cannot force a society into corruption.
So what can it do?
It only has the power to suggest bad ideas and paint highly convincing, completely false pictures.
So it's hacking the interface. It's altering the display on the pilot's monitor, but it doesn't actually control the steering column itself.
That is a flawless summary. It alters the display. It shows you a projection.
Like what does the projection sound like?
It whispers, if you take this moral shortcut on your taxes, you will be richer and safer. Or, if you lash out in anger at your partner right now, you will finally establish dominance and be respected.
It makes the wrong choice look logical.
Exactly. It creates a false reality where the 1-degree drift appears to be the most logical, most beneficial, most protective path available to you.
So it leverages our own survival instincts against us. It uses our desire for safety or our fear of losing out to convince us to change the flight path.
Yes. It relies heavily on the fear of scarcity.
The idea that there isn't enough.
Right. There isn't enough success, so you must cheat to get yours, or there isn't enough love, so you must manipulate people to keep it. This is the delusion.
Okay, I am tracking this perfectly on a personal level. I can totally see how the software glitch creates a false projection in my own mind, leading to a 1-degree drift in my behavior.
It's very relatable.
But how does this scale? Because we don't just see this in individuals. We see systemic corruption everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
We see massive institutions failing. We see entire societies drifting miles off course. How does a bad thought in one person's head turn into a completely corrupt society?
To understand the scale, we have to move from the micro to the macro. We have to map how internal bias translates into external corruption.
How does the text map that?
The misleading signal happens in 2 distinct operational spheres. First, internally, within your own consciousness, and second, externally, through other people in systemic structures.
So the internal is what we just mapped out. The quiet, personal voice of greed justifying a tiny lie.
Right.
The burst of pride telling you to cut off a friend who just gave you some constructive criticism. The micro-compromises, the personal kutuwat.
Exactly. But those individual footsteps eventually pool together, and this leads to the external sociological manifestation.
The macro level.
Yes. This is where you see the corrupt leader using carefully crafted lies to divide a population. It's the greedy corporation mathematically calculating how to exploit vulnerable workers for, like, a fraction of a % of profit.
Or social media.
Oh, absolutely. It's a toxic social media algorithm designed to enrage you just to keep your attention glued to the screen.
I need to pause and clarify something major here.
Sure.
Because if I look at a greedy CEO dumping toxic waste into a river or a politician spreading racial division, In the traditional mythological view, we'd say they're being influenced by the devil.
The devil made them do it.
Right. We'd say the monster is whispering in their ear, tempting them to be evil.
Yeah.
But if I'm following this blueprint,
Mm-hmm.
they aren't being influenced by the monster.
No.
The text is saying they literally are the Cheyenne in that specific sociological system. Is that accurate?
That is entirely accurate. And the text does not leave this open to mere interpretation. It actually provides empirical proof within its own structure.
Wait, really? How so?
Through a mechanism called tasrif.
Tasrif.
Yes. This is how the Quran explains itself through internal cross-referencing. It repeats concepts in different contexts to firmly lock in the definition.
Okay, so where is the proof?
In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 14, the text refers to human leaders of subversion as shayinihim, meaning they're disruptive vectors.
It explicitly calls human beings by that title.
Yes, it identifies flesh and blood human beings who lead systems into corruption using this exact term.
Wow. That completely shatters the mythological view.
It does. It confirms that a Shaytan is not a separate, invisible, supernatural species. It is a functional role.
It's an active state.
It is a state of being that a human actively embodies when they execute that code of Shin Ya, Ya, and Nun.
So when the CEO signs the paper to exploit the workers just to pump the stock price, he isn't being possessed by a demon.
Not at all.
He is embodying the active agency, diffuse complexity. He is the Ya executing the Sheen. He is acting as the systemic malfunction for his entire company.
He is the vector. And the text expands on this structural classification even further in Surah Al-An'am, verse 1 and 12.
What does that one say?
It says there are disruptive vectors, Shayana, of two categories. The first is mankind, the visible mainstream society termed al-ins.
Al-ins. The people we can see, the institutions, the politicians, the media.
Exactly. But it also lists a second category, hidden forces termed al-jinn.
Okay, we have to touch the third rail here. Jinn.
I knew we'd get here.
Because again, popular culture has a massive footprint here. When you say jinn, people immediately think of a genie in a brass lamp granting 3 wishes. Or, some invisible ghost moving furniture around in an old house.
And again, we must return to the phonosemantic root to strip away all that folklore.
Okay, let's run the code on jinn.
The root of jinn is jimnun. Linguistically, this root simply refers to something that is concealed, hidden, or uncultivated.
So just something you can't see.
Exactly. For example, the Arabic word for a developing fetus in the womb is janin because it is hidden from view. The word for a lush, dense garden is jana because the soil is hidden by the thick foliage.
Oh, wow. It's literally just a descriptor of visibility.
That's it. So when the text speaks of the disruptive vectors of al-jinn, it is referring to hidden forces.
Hidden forces in what sense?
This could mean unseen psychological elements, hidden backroom conspiracies, uncultivated wild aspects of our own subconscious, or systemic structures operating in the shadows that we just aren't consciously aware of.
So it's multi-category classification of behavior. You have the visible vectors of disruption, the corrupt laws, the toxic public figures.
Right.
And you have the hidden vectors, the subconscious biases, the algorithmic manipulations, the unseen cultural pressures. It's just a total mapping of how systems fail, both in the light and in the dark.
It is a comprehensive diagnostic of systemic decay.
This raises a massive structural question for me, though. We see how the system decays. We see what the vector is. But how does a human being become this vector of disruption?
That is the ultimate question.
Yeah. How does a normal, conscious individual with the capacity for logic and empathy undergo this malfunction and just choose to become the Cheyenne of their own life or their family or their organization?
To understand the origin of the malfunction, the blueprint points us to the historical genesis of this vector. The primary title given to the historical origin point of this systemic deviation is Iblis.
Iblis. Okay, we know the drill now. We're not taking that as just a proper name. We need to run the atomic deconstruction. Let's look at the root code for Iblis.
The root of Iblis is balamsin, and phonosemantically, this root translates to a state of total despair, absolute bankruptcy, or a systemic dead end.
Bankruptcy, that is such a specific mechanical word. It implies a ledger. It implies a total depletion of resources.
It implies that the system has run out of viable capital to sustain itself, and the narrative surrounding Iblis reveals exactly how a conscious entity arrives at this state of bankruptcy and becomes a disruptive vector.
How does it happen?
It happens through a very specific, deeply identifiable psychological fracture. It is the refusal to align the ego with the universal laws of truth and equilibrium.
We're talking about the Genesis narrative, right? The story of creation, the fire and the clay.
Yes. In the textual narrative, when the human system is created, Iblis is expected to acknowledge its placement in the universal equilibrium,
But he doesn't.
but Iblis refuses. And the justification he uses is fascinating. He claims superiority based purely on material composition.
Material composition.
He says, I am better than him. You created me from fire and created him from clay.
I am better than him because of what I am made of. It is the ultimate materialist argument.
Exactly.
My atoms are superior to his atoms. Therefore, I am exempt from the rules of the system.
That is the exact genesis of cognitive bias mirroring intentional navigational drift. It is the moment the psychological fracture occurs.
So that's the start of the drift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Iblis looks at the sustainable path, the as, and decides his own ego is more important than the homeostasis of the universe.
It's the birth of supremacy. I mean, it's the exact same logic used for centuries of racism, classism, and systemic oppression.
It's the same blueprint.
My skin is this color, yours is that color, so I am better. Or my bank account has this number, yours has that, so I am completely exempt from the rules.
It is the blueprint of artificial division. Once you believe you are fundamentally separate from and inherently superior to the system you exist within, your mind naturally undergoes fragmentation. You detach from reality.
Because reality is interconnected. The ecosystem relies on everything working together. By claiming superiority, you've essentially entered a state of delusion.
And once you are in that state of delusion, you become a source of disruption. You begin scattering peace. You create artificial hierarchies.
You become the virus.
You enter a state of systemic bankruptcy, Balamsin, because you cut yourself off from the truth. And in doing so, you begin operating as the active agency of complexity. You become the Shaytan.
I have to take a breath, because this is heavy. Let's just look at what we've done here. We have fundamentally dismantled the monster in the closet.
We really have.
We've taken the boogeyman, and we've decoded the software of systemic malfunction. We've seen how it relies on the Shinya sequence to cause a 1-degree drift in our avionics.
Step by step.
And we've mapped how it infects individuals and institutions, turning conscious beings into vectors of corruption simply because of their own ego, their fear of scarcity, and their material arrogance.
It is, without hyperbole, one of the most sophisticated psychological diagnostics ever recorded.
Which means you, listening right now, are almost certainly asking the exact same question I am. Because this is terrifying in a completely new way.
How to stop it.
Yeah. If this code is running all the time, if this 1-degree drift is so incredibly subtle, and if the vector relies on my own internal dopamine loops and fears, how do I make sure I am not the pilot flying my plane into the wilderness? How do we defend the cockpit?
I understand why it feels daunting. It's a lot to process. But what is truly remarkable about this textual blueprint is that the core message regarding this force is actually deeply, profoundly empowering.
Empowering. How so?
Well, think about the alternative. If you genuinely believe your enemy is a magical, invisible monster with supernatural powers who can possess you from the shadows, you are inherently a victim.
Right. You're completely helpless.
You are passive. You are trapped in a state of superstitious fear, just waiting to be overwhelmed by a power far greater than your own.
If it's a magical beast, I'm just prey. I have no agency at all.
But the text entirely negates that. Once you understand that this force operates solely as a systemic deviation, once you realize it is nothing more than a false projection, a glitch on a screen with absolutely zero physical power over you, the entire strategy shifts.
So we go on the offensive.
It shifts from passive fear to active intellectual defense.
You realize you are the one holding the yoke.
Exactly. You are the pilot. And the blueprint makes it clear that the ultimate defense mechanism against delusion is the analytical mind, the ACL.
Let's talk about the ACL. You mentioned it earlier. What does that word mean functionally?
The root of ACL comes from the concept of tethering or tying something down, like tying the leg of a camel so it doesn't wander off into the desert at night.
Okay, a tether.
In human terms, it is your intellect, your reasoning, your ability to tether your emotions and desires to logic, truth, and justice. The human psychological system is designed to be monitored. You have the instruments to detect the drift.
So how do we perform an instrument scan in real life? If we are flying the plane, how do we detect the kutuat, the footsteps, before we veer miles off course?
You have to ask yourself constant, rigorous, almost uncomfortable questions. You have to actively monitor your internal inputs.
Give me an example.
Ask yourself, are you making a small compromise in your integrity today? Just a tiny one. Does a toxic choice or a shortcut suddenly look incredibly attractive to you?
And more importantly, why does it look attractive?
Yes, that is the key. You must audit the desire. Is it because it promises instant gratification? Is it driven by a fear of scarcity?
That panic feeling.
Right, a sudden panicked feeling that if you don't grab this advantage right now, even if it's completely unethical, you'll lose out and be left behind.
It's about isolating the signal. The practical application for you listening is huge here. Imagine you're sitting in a tense meeting at work. Or, let's be real, you're just doom scrolling on your phone late at night.
We all do it.
Yeah, and suddenly you feel that spike of artificial division. You feel that irrational desire to mock someone online, or to lie to cover up a mistake you made, or to look down on someone because of their status. In the past, you might just act on it.
Because it feels natural.
Because it feels natural. But with this blueprint, you can actually stop and label it.
And labeling it is where you reclaim your agency.
You can sit there and say, wait, that spike of anger, that sudden urge to cheat, that is Shin and Yago executing. That is a 1-degree drift happening in real time.
Calling it out.
And the moment you label it as a mechanical glitch, the moment you realize it's just a false magnetic signal trying to trick your instruments, it loses all its mystical power. It's just a bad line of code.
That is the absolute essence of the defense. Because the vector relies entirely on delusion, on shadows and false projections. Shining the bright light of the analytical mind on it causes the illusion to just evaporate.
Because it wasn't real to begin with.
Exactly. A delusion cannot survive scrutiny. A false magnetic signal only works if the pilot blindly trusts it without cross-referencing their other instruments.
You cross-reference the lie with reality. You check your altitude. You check your horizon line.
You use your ACL to see the delusion for what it is, and once you see it, the spell is broken. You can simply ignore the faulty signal. You actively take the yoke, and you steer the plane manually back to the sustainable path. You return to 8.
I want you to imagine bringing back that clean, rhythmic hum of the avionics suite, the steady beep of the radar. Because we aren't in the woods anymore.
No more hooves in the dark.
There is no wind. There are no cloven hooves. There is just the clean, highly engineered, brightly lit cockpit of our own consciousness. We have traveled so far today, from the dark ages of fearing a goat-legged beast in the shadows to stepping into the light of accountability.
We're the pilots now.
We are fully aware now of our responsibility to monitor our own navigational instruments.
It is a profound shift, isn't it? It moves the burden of morality from fighting imaginary demons to maintaining the integrity of our own internal systems.
It really is. To summarize this whole journey for you listening, the ultimate villain of this ancient text is not an external magical force out to get you. It has no pitchfork.
It's much closer to home.
The text is warning you about the very real, very everyday danger of systemic deviation. It's the rogue thought, the selfish desire, the ego-driven superiority, or the corrupt institution that tries to fragment your reality, scatter your peace, and lock a 1-degree error into your persistent record, your noon.
And if we connect that back to the reality we live in every single day, it leaves us with an incredibly important, lingering idea to mull over.
What's that?
If the true nature of this destructive force isn't a grand cinematic explosion of evil, if it isn't a villain monologuing in the shadows, but rather it is a quiet, almost unnoticeable 1-degree shift in our trajectory, it makes you wonder about the persistent records we are writing right now.
The footsteps we are taking today.
Look at the systems you interact with daily. Look at your workplace, your social media feeds, your political affiliations, your relationships, your own internal habits. Where is the quietest, most mundane 1-degree drift happening in your life today, disguised entirely as business as usual?
Where's the code running right now? Silently. I think that's something we all need to check our instruments for.